Welcome to the Future is Borderless podcast with David Nilsson. We feature top entrepreneurs and thought leaders from around the world, those who bring a global mindset and a unique perspective to their life and business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everyone, David Nilsson here, and I'm the host of this podcast. The goal of this show is to connect with business leaders from around the world who have what I refer to as a borderless mindset, people that are willing to share their ideas and innovations, best practices, effectively things that can be applied in both our personal and professional life, helping us to lead in a rapidly changing world. Now, this episode is brought to you by DOXA Talent. DOXA Talent helps businesses to source full-time, highly skilled workers from all over the world. And as a result, these companies can scale faster, increase margin, and improve culture. The most common roles that they help companies fill are virtual assistants, finance professionals, sales and service help desk, even software engineers. To learn more about leveraging offshore talent to build your business, go to doxatalent.com. All right, today on our podcast, we're joined by Cameron Herold. He is a seasoned entrepreneur known widely as the CEO Whisperer. Cameron got his start as the CEO of 1-800-GOT-JUNK, where he helped grow the business from 2 million to 106 million and expanding its team from 14 to 3,100 employees in 6 years. He's the founder of COO Alliance and the author of at least 5 books like Vivid Vision, Meetings Suck, and Second in Command, which shares the name with his podcast. I've had a chance to see him speak many times, and I would describe his presentations as enlightening, dynamic, and actionable. So there's no surprise that he's been invited to speak on all 7 continents. We had a great conversation about business and leadership, so please listen in for more on Cameron Herold. Cameron, well, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, David, good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. Well, look, in your introduction, I talk a little bit about your experience with 1-800-GOT-JUNK, and you were there as the COO. You guys grew it from, I think what I read, 2 million to 100. But the thing that actually just was mind-boggling to me is that you grew the team from like 15 to 3,000 over that period of time.
Yeah.
I'm actually really curious, as you look back on that experience, what do you think was your greatest contribution? What was it that you sort of helped build or develop that really catalyzed that type of growth?
You know, it's interesting. Brian and I, Brian being the CEO and founder, we had an unfair advantage. We were in an EO forum for 4.5 years together as forum mates before I joined him as his second in command. So he basically had a 4.5-year interview of me. He watched me build 2 EO qualifying companies, one that we built and sold, one that we built and took public. And then I was watching him run his business, and he was also my best man at my wedding 3 months before I started to work for him. So we had this really crazy strong relationship, and I was able to come in and hit the ground running. That was the first thing. Second was, that was the 3rd franchise company that I was able to build. So I'd already built 2 other franchise companies prior to that. I'd opened the West Coast of the United States for College Pro Painters, which became the largest residential house painting company on the planet. I also opened up what became known as Boyd Auto Body in Canada and Gerber Auto Collision in the United States, which went on to become the largest collision repair chain in the world. So Brian, having watched me do all of those things and knew I had the experience, was able to just let me come in and get it going. So I didn't really get anything delegated to me from Brian for the next 4 years. I was basically saying, here's what the plan is, here's what we're going to execute on. And he ran, IT and finance, and I just ran everything else. So I think that was why it just worked.
Yeah, I was going to say that's 4 years in a forum, you get to know each other pretty well. But look, I've had the same business partner since 2003, so 20 years. He's still my best friend, still a business partner, and I've seen more partnerships erode over the years than succeed. And so I'm curious,
Sure.
What was it about you and Brian, not just the forum relationship, but what was the dynamic between the two of you that allowed you guys to see such great success together?
There were a couple things. The first is that we committed to each other on day one that we would not let it hurt our relationship, that we knew at some point that we would probably split ways and we would make sure that we remained friends. That was number one. Number two, we engaged a coach very early on. We actually got Joan Mara, who is a global forum trainer for EO, come in and work with Brian on our relationship and interpersonal skills about 3 months after we started. And then I think third was I was just so aligned with his vivid vision, or what he called the painted picture at the time. I was really aligned and engaged with what he was building, that I was just excited to help him build it. But so I think those are probably the three things.
Yeah, it's so funny. Sometimes people ask me like, what's the secret to the partnership? And I always tell people, well, we invest in it like a marriage. And one
Yeah.
of the things I think is really important is actually having a coach, or what I would call a therapist, that helps you have discussions well before that they're at that critical stage where it's starting to really impact the relationship. So I love that you're able to call on Joan for some of that.
He was great.
Let's talk about the COO. One of the things first of all, I'll talk about this later, but I have the second in command, your latest book on unleashing the power of your COO. But what's really interesting is I was going through this, I realized even for me, I'm not sure everyone is aligned on what a COO is and sort of how it brings value to the organization. So I thought maybe it'd be good for you and I to start there and just talk about what is a COO, and I'd love to hear like what compelled you to write the book.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The reason I even called the book The Second in Command instead of the COO is COO is just one potential title for a number of different titles that could exist for whoever is the second in command to the CEO. So your second in command could be an executive assistant. If you're a 5-person company, the person you lean on and pass work off to, the one that you maybe most trust with your bank account and your passwords, could be your EA. Maybe it's a director of operations, an operations manager, a vice president of operations, or it could be a COO. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I think Gino Wickman, when he wrote the book Traction and then wrote Rocket Fuel, talked about the visionary and the integrator. And in that case, the integrator would be that second in command, because you're going to have different people running different business areas, but the COO tends to have much broader scope across the organization and tends to be the true yin and yang partner to the entrepreneur, the CEO. So the first thing to look at is the second in command, or the COO, tends to be really good at the stuff that the entrepreneur sucks at, right? They also tend to want to work on all of the business areas that the CEO is maybe drained of energy in. So that's number one. Number two, the title that you give the person should be tied to their roles and responsibilities, the amount of pay that you're willing to give them, the level of strategic insight that they can bring into the organization, the amount of P&L responsibility that they have, and the amount of people that they can bring with them, like new employees or partners or suppliers into the organization, because they've kind of been there and done that a number of times. So as an example, when I walked into 1-800-GOT-JUNK, I had full autonomy. I knew exactly what needed to be done. And for the first 4 years, I was showing Brian what we needed to do. It wasn't being delegated to me. He'd never built a franchise company. So I had a lot of strategic insight. I had deep P&L responsibility. I was recruiting key franchisees into the organization, from college pro painters, key executives into the organization. I brought supplier relationships into the organization. I managed the entire budget and marketing spend of up to $5 million over the next few years. So that level of strategic insight, P&L responsibility, full autonomy, and then what I was being paid, I left the organization 17 years ago. My comp 17 years ago was $306,000. So I was making 300 grand in 2007. That's more of a true COO. If you're paying someone $120,000 a year, at best, they're probably more like a director of operations, and you're probably telling them what to do. They're probably executing against your plan. They're probably executing against your strategy. They're not necessarily making decisions like a true COO would make.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a big difference. And I think that's probably normal with younger businesses. You're trying to find the best person you can with the budget that you have. But at some point you grow into that place where you're ready to give some freedom and autonomy to an individual to help take the business further and faster.
We've also had a lot of title inflation over the last couple of decades. So I want to speak to that briefly, but 30 years ago, even 25 years ago, to get a C-level title, whether you're a chief marketing officer, chief technology officer, chief financial officer, chief, operating officer, you had to be a pretty major player at a pretty major company. At best, people were getting vice president titles or director titles, and they usually meant exactly what they were supposed to mean. The first time I ever saw title inflation was I saw the banks in the 90s giving out big titles to people. Like anyone who joined a bank got a vice president title.
Yeah.
And then when the internet was really going from 95 to 2000, we gave out equity in lieu of compensation. So we gave stock options instead of pay. When the stock market crashed in October of 2000, Now people not only wanted to have stock options still, even though they were worthless, they still wanted them. And they now wanted to get paid something, but we started to give them titles as like a marketing tool. And then with the rise of social media, LinkedIn around 2003, 2004, all of a sudden Facebook came out in 2007. When all of a sudden social media came out and emails being used, the title became a marketing tool. So we felt as an entrepreneur, oh, if I give people a big title, it'll help them open doors. It'll help them be taken more seriously, which is true, but there's a cost to that because the employee, let's say it's a director level who has a COO title, now goes on Google and Indeed to see what COOs should get paid, and they don't think they're getting paid enough. So now we start having to pay them more, even though they're not really in that role, and they don't have anything to chase. If you give them such a big title, what title are they going to get next? So it actually causes a lot more harm than good in giving out those big titles, much more harm than the entrepreneur tends to think it does.
So funny. I always tell people that the titles will eventually catch up with you for the exact reason you said, right? At first, it feels exciting and special, but eventually they say, well, I'm underpaid for a COO then, right? And
then you got to say to them, well, you're not really a COO. Well, then why did you give me the title?
Exactly, which doesn't help anyone. So funny. The first time I learned that, I was actually 2003. I met somebody from a bank who was a VP, and I assumed that meant they were an executive. Later, I found out they were an account manager. So it happened there.
And it was my old roommate in college got a VP title with Bear Stearns back around 1998. And I asked him about it, and he said, we all get VP titles. Like, he just was like, it's so dumb.
Totally. Tell me a little bit about, I mean, a minute ago, you were talking about the COOs, the yin, the yang, and you said that, sorry, the COO or second in command, and you've got a CEO who's great at certain things. So you're going to go out and look for your second in command who's bringing other things to the table that that individual may not. So how do you start to think about the skills and attributes that make a great second in command if it is also sort of dependent on the entrepreneur itself?
You know, this is really interesting. I just held an event last week called the COO Alliance, and we had one of our in-person events, and we had COOs from all over the world come to Vancouver, Canada for this event. And I was talking to the group, and I said, as good as a COO that I was for 1-800-GOT-JUNK, I would have been a horrible COO for most of the people in the room, for most of their companies. You know, for most EO members, I'd be a terrible COO because I don't match the skills of that entrepreneur. I don't necessarily match the behavioral traits of that entrepreneur. I may not have any industry experience for that industry that they're in, or I might be too entrepreneurial and they might be too corporate. You know, I might not be there for the right season that they're in. What's very different about the COO role is you have to match all of those things. But if you're the head of marketing, you could probably be the head of marketing for most companies your size. If you're the head of IT, you could be the head of IT for most companies your size. Head of finance, the same. Because all you need to be good at when you're the head of a functional area is that functional area, and you have to match the core values of the company. But the second in command needs to match the CEO, the season that the actual company is in, the skill set for the industry or the IP, and then their ability to lead leaders, right? Because you're leading all of the functional heads, you're running cross-matrix decision-making, you're running multiple P&Ls. You often have to be much better at all areas of business than a functional head needs to be.
Yeah. It's interesting when you said most of the functional heads report to the COO. There's a business coach that I worked with years ago. His name's Lex Sisney. He's fantastic. He was a guest on the podcast. He actually talks about the Queen of England structure, which is where the CEO has somebody reporting to them and everybody else reports to that individual. So how do you think about breaking up the org chart and making sure that the right people are reporting to the CEO versus the second in command and so on?
So the beauty of the entrepreneur is they get to delegate everything except genius, right? They get to rig all the rules in their favor. So the first stage that an entrepreneur will start to go through massive growth is if they get stuff off their plate that drains them of energy, or they get stuff off their plate that they suck at. So every entrepreneur, when you're looking to hire your first second in command, it's to identify what parts of the business feed you with energy, right? What is your unique ability? What are your areas of genius? What are the parts of the business that you're really good at and that you love doing, and delegate everything else? So, and that's very different. In some cases, the COO runs marketing. In other cases, the CEO runs marketing. In some cases, the COO runs IT. Like I would say that 70% of my COO Alliance members have finance report to them, 30% don't. 70% have IT report to them, 30% don't. 70% of marketing, 30% don't. It just depends on that CEO skill set. So Harley Finkelstein, who is the COO at Shopify, is a very outward-facing business development, sales, marketing, PR, external culture. He's speaks on behalf of the organization. Whereas Eric Church, who is the new COO for 1-800-GOT-JUNK, and they're now at 650 million in revenue. Eric is a very inward-facing COO, never speaks to the media, doesn't do any culture stuff, doesn't do speaking events. He's more process and strategy and people. And I was the same company, but I was more of an outward-facing COO because we needed it at that season we were in. So you have to match the season, the culture, the skills. It's a really weird mix.
Yeah. Well, you talked about allowing the CEO to delegate everything but genius. I would go on a limb and say that I have noticed with some entrepreneurs that maybe there's a lack of self-awareness. Sometimes they actually don't know what gives them energy or takes their energy because they're just so overwhelmed.
Yeah, they're on that hamster wheel and they don't take pause to work on themselves. They don't do a 360 review with their friends or their forum mates to find out what drains them or what they're good at. And because they've always done it, they feel like they always need to do it. Like I had a CEO one day and he said, "Oh, I can't delegate all of this stuff because no one can do it." And I said, "Actually, delegate it to people and spend your time coaching them so that they can do it, right? Grow their skills, grow their confidence, grow their connections so that they can do more. But your job is to actually do less."
Have you found, are there any sort of early indicators for people as to when's the right time to start thinking about bringing in a true second in command?
Yeah, it's when you're being drained of energy, when you're realizing that you don't have time to grow people, right? A leader's core job is to grow people. So if the only time you have for your direct reports is that 30-minute weekly meeting, and then you kind of don't see them for the rest of the week, that probably means that you actually could leverage a second in command. If you're feeling like you're not working on the areas that are feeding you, that could be the reason you need the second in command. If you don't have time to be strategic or to focus on culture, that could be an opportunity to bring in that second in command. And a really good second in command should be able to generate 3 to 4 times their overhead in terms of incremental gross margin. So if you're going to pay someone $300,000 a year, their job is to generate between $900,000 and $1.2 million in new gross margin over the next couple of years, so that they're able to start paying for themselves in an incremental way.
Yeah.
Right? We only start a company for one of 3 reasons. One, to give us that feeling of accomplishment. Like, look, I accomplished something. I started a business. Number 2 is to give us money. And number 3 is to give us free time. A lot of entrepreneurs don't want to look in the mirror and realize that their only satisfaction in life is running their business. They've really separated from their spouse. They've separated from themselves. They've separated from their hobbies. And at the end of the day, they've kind of begun to get a little bit boring. When you wake up to that and you realize, wow, I could have a better life, could have a better relationship, could have better health, if I can hire someone to offload a lot of my stuff to, that's a great reason to be getting your first second in command.
Yeah, a lot of entrepreneurs sacrifice themselves. They always say, "Well, I will invest in a COO when I can," right? Like,
right.
And it sounds like you've got a nice little thought around how what to expect in terms of what they should be able to bring. I recently had an opportunity in my own business. I needed a CFO who had some operational expertise. So it was a second in command, but with more of a financial bent. But I was lucky enough to find one on a fractional basis that, after a little bit of time, we decided, boy, we like working together and we think the future is brighter if we continue to do so. So he joined the team full time. I'm curious if you've seen that same thing happen with COOs, where there's, the fractional, someone starts from a fractional standpoint, but eventually regularizes them over time.
That's how I started with Brian. I was actually billing Brian by the hour for the first 3 months for work that I was doing to help him scale 1-800-GOT-JUNK. And all of a sudden he's like, "This is insane. You've got way too much to do and I can't keep paying you this crazy hourly rate. Can you just come on full time?" So that is literally exactly how it started. I just said that we needed to build out a marketing program, coaching program, leadership development program, build out a PR team, build out franchise training, write his franchise manual. And as I started working through all those things, he's like, "This is a full-time role for a couple of years." I'm like, "Yeah, I didn't anticipate that, but you're right. we have a really big benefit right now that we didn't have 20 years ago, and that's we have Wi-Fi. Laptops are easily priced. People can live globally. All the technology tools are there to work and live globally. COVID showed us that you can be anywhere in the world and work. So not only can you actually hire a fractional person, whether it's fractional CFO, fractional CMO, fractional COO, they can also be anywhere in the world as long as you set them up with clear roles and responsibilities, clear communication channels, and you actually try to make sure that they focus on the stuff that's going to give you the best leverage.
Yeah, I know that. Let me ask you about onboarding though, because, in a remote environment, we have to onboard very differently than, when you're in an office, you kind of pick things up through osmosis. A C-level onboarding is very different than sort of your typical hire. So do you have any best practices or thoughts on how to effectively onboard a C-level or second in command?
Yeah. And first off, that any onboarding should take just as long as the actual interviewing process took. So if it takes you 2.5 months to interview and hire someone, your onboarding should be about 2.5 months. If it takes you a week to interview and hire somebody, maybe you can pull off on, your onboarding a little bit faster. And I'll give you some reasons for that.
Yeah.
There is not a single human in history that can join a new company and understand the culture, the people, the strategy, the plans, the software tools that are used, the customer relationships, the supplier relationships, all the idiosyncrasies of how we do things. That takes time. And if you expect someone, regardless of how strong their skills are, to come in and just jump in and start working, you are completely ludicrous. The problem is that most entrepreneurs are so happy to have finally hired this person and they're exhausted and they just dump everything onto their plate, but they're not delegating properly, right? They're literally abdicating. I launched a course about 2 years ago called Invest in Your Leaders, and one of the core modules is around delegation. You need to be careful with how you delegate to a new second in command or any new senior executive to make sure that they understand the lay of the land, they understand the people, they understand the budgets, they understand the business more. So yeah, there should be a much longer onboarding process. For a new second in command coming into the company, here's how I see their first 90 days. In the first 30 days, their job is to come in and meet with every person, go for breakfast, lunches, and dinners, sit in on meetings, have virtual breakfast and lunches and dinners with every manager, sit in on every marketing meeting, sit in on finance meetings, sit in on IT meetings, sit in on board meetings, sit in on strategy meetings, sit in on leadership team meetings, and pretty much say nothing for the first 30 days, listen, observe, and then in a notebook, like a physical notebook, write down all your ideas of things that you want to change or fix, or people you want to hire, people you want to fire. And don't do any of that in the first 30 days except write notes. In the second 30 days, go back and stress test all of your ideas. Go back and check in. I think I should fire Bob. Go talk to a bunch of people. You might realize, no, you have to handcuff Bob. We're going to fire Kelly, right? Or I need to integrate this new CRM. Yeah, but not till next year. Or we need to replace this piece of software. No, actually, this software is amazing. We just need to train people in it. When you start stress testing all of your ideas, you'll come up with a list of projects that are probably worth doing. Then you can kind of rank order them in which ones are the easiest to put in place. I call it the PETA factor. Which ones have the lowest pain in the ass factor to put that project in place? Which ones take the least amount of time, least amount of energy, least amount of money? And in the third month, start putting a bunch of those ideas and projects into motion so that your team goes, wow, these are easy. I love that idea. That worked well. That paid off a good dividend. Maybe it was like launching a satellite. It's in orbit forever and it pays dividends forever. That gives the people and the company enough trust in you, and it gives you enough time that in the second quarter, you can start working on some of the bigger, hairier projects.
I love the rule of thumb that it should, the interview process, that timeline should mirror the onboarding. And I assume, and I guess I'm looking for a reaction to this, and that is because, the larger the role, a C-level or second in command, the interview process is likely to be a little bit longer. And thus, when they come on, the types of decisions that you're going to ask them to make, the things that they're going to take on are much larger and have a larger impact on the organization as a whole. So you want them to start by listening and learning and not feeling this production, this need to produce at a massive amount out of the gates.
Right. Or the need to make change at that kind of pace. Like the worst thing a new COO or senior executive can do in the first 30 days is fire someone or bring a couple of their friends into the company. Disaster pants waiting to happen. Just the worst decision ever. Or to make some big integration decision where it's going to start requiring a lot of people to work hard, they don't even like you yet. They don't even trust you yet. They don't even know you yet. And now you're putting all this extra work on their plate. So it is about slowing down and getting to really understand the culture, the core values, the vivid vision, the history of the company, the way that people move, the way that people understand, and getting people to understand you. I think every executive should write a 2-page operating manual to themselves, right? Imagine if there was a 2-page operating manual to David Nielsen, and I could read to understand how you like to be spoken to, how you like to be approached. Is your open door policy really open door, or is it more like a screen door, right? How do you like emails to be sent to you? How do you handle conflict? What are your different personality profiles? Imagine if you knew yourself so well that you could write a 2-page operating manual to you. And in your first week of being in a company, you sat down with everybody and got them to understand you as you're trying to understand them. But what, again, most people do is they're like, oh, we're so glad to have you. Great. They're going to be starting. Here's all your direct reports. Press play. They don't understand anything to be making those decisions yet.
Yeah, and that person feels pressure to demonstrate ROI, and so that sort of those two forces can actually create a lot of pain.
And that's why Joan Mara had to come in and start working with Brian and I at the month 1 mark, was because I'd come in like a bull in a china shop, and Brian was so glad to have me. And all of a sudden we're like, wait, I don't even know this business yet. Like I don't know anything.
Yeah. So let's talk about it, because not every hire is the right one, right? And not every partnership lasts. So if you do find yourself in a spot where you've brought in an individual who is in that sort of like elevated role, and it's not an effective partnership relationship for whatever reason, do you have any sort of thoughts on how to best transition somebody like that out of the organization? Is it rip the Band-Aid? Is it wait and do it slowly? How do you think about that?
Well, the first part before I address how to get them out is the company needs to do its own self-examination for what went wrong from their point of view. What was their contribution to the problem? Because you did hire the person, you did onboard the person, you did have that person reporting to you. What did you do wrong in all of that time that now you're having to get rid of them? You were at one point excited about them. What did you miss? What did you do wrong? Or how did we possibly outgrow them? How did we not invest in their skills, their confidence, their connections ongoing, so that we're now having to get rid of them, right? That's number one. Because if a company doubles in size, they need to double in their skill set. But if at any point you have doubt, you have no doubt, right? When your gut's telling you they're the wrong person, they're probably the wrong person. But you do need to have that self-exam. One of my biggest pet peeves is when an entrepreneur is like, oh, I'm so glad they're gone. They were such a jerk. I'm like, well, you hired the jerk. You were managing the jerk. You were the one spending time with the jerk. Like, but so few will ever examine their contribution to the problem. And that's where a lot of the big learning happens.
Let me just jump into that for a second here, because you're really talking about doing a retrospective, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like when a project goes south, or at the end, you want to try and figure out how could we be better in the future. Have you seen any trends with all the people that you've talked to about a second in command? Have you seen any sort of commonalities on why a hire may fail at this level of the organization?
It's usually that the company outgrows them, or that you hired some, if it's early, like if it's in the first 30 or 60 days or 3 to 6 months, you probably did not have the skill set on how to actually interview and onboard someone. You know, again, one of the modules in my Invest in Your Leaders course is around interviewing. I talked to a CEO about this 3 months ago, and I was like, how much training have you ever had on interviewing? He's like, well, I read a book on it and I've watched a couple of videos. I'm like, no, how much training have you had on how to do interviews? He goes, well, I've probably hired and interviewed 100 people. I'm like, no, I'm not asking you how many you've hired. He goes, I've had no training. And I said, so maybe you've done it wrong every single one of that 100 times. He's like, oh shit. Like, it didn't even dawn on him that he really didn't know what he was trying his best, but he was like a fly trying to get out a window, and he's going to keep banging his head on the window until he gets out. He ends up dead on the windowsill. So if it's early on, and I've noticed this with lots of companies, when they have a lot of turnover in that first 3 months, 6 months, it's usually an interviewing issue or an onboarding issue that the company has, where you don't actually know how to select the right people. At College Pro Painters, we had to go out and recruit and interview and hire 800 franchisees every year in 4 months. And then in 1 month, we had to train those 800 people to hire 8,000 students to paint houses. Imagine hiring 8,000 people in a month. We had to be operationally world-class at that, because we couldn't afford to lose them because we had to operate the company in only 4 months. Between May 1st and August 31st, we had to paint $60 million in houses. So we became operationally world-class at recruiting, interviewing, hiring, onboarding, and development of people. Most companies suck at that. If you're good at that, and if you're talking about, well, we're 2 years in, 3 years in, replacing somebody, what went wrong? It's usually that the company grew so quickly and that person didn't continue to grow their skill set and their capacity and their confidence and their connections because the company is changing really fast. That's usually the first thing. The second thing that could be is that you hired someone to come in and do today's job, not the job that they're going to be doing over the next 2 years, right? You didn't hire someone who is much better than what's needed today and told them to roll up their sleeves and get dirty. So you didn't hire ahead of the curve. And again, that usually comes down to strategy and planning, where the company's not thinking about the staffing resources of what they'll need 2 years out, 1 year out. They tend to hire for the gap today, and they realize that the gap today is not going to be what the gap is in 12 months. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh shit, the person can't do the job. Well, why did you hire them to do this job when what you really needed them to do was the next 3 years of jobs?
Yeah. I can see that happening. I mean, most people don't hire these sort of senior level roles until they absolutely have to, or actually later than they need. And by then they're just trying to, fix the leaky hole and just deal with the issues that are there today.
So that's why it's rarely the person that you're hiring's problem. It's usually more of a leadership team skill issue on the company side around strategy, around planning, around interviewing and hiring, and around always growing your people skills.
Yeah, I think actually at some point I'd love to have you back and talk about interviewing, because I do think this is an issue that most people don't have a lot of training in, but is a critical issue for purposes of getting the right people and retaining them long term.
Totally.
You talked about investing, you gave the example, like the company grew really quickly, but the individual that is in that position didn't grow as quickly. I want to talk about the COO Alliance, right? This is an organization you started to help people sort of elevate their skills and learn from other people. Can you talk a little bit about what was the genesis behind that?
Well, it was because I kept going to all these events that were meant to be for entrepreneurs. I would show up at an EO event, or I would go to a Genius Network event, or I'd go to a Baby Bathwater, Vistage, YPO. I've worked with EO now in 28 countries. I've presented to EO chapters in 28 countries. But when I'm going into the EO world as an entrepreneur, it's for entrepreneurs. And often they'll bring some of their leaders to an event, but the leaders don't fit in. Or they'll bring their COO to an event, but the COO doesn't fit in. It's kind of like a guy showing up at a baby shower. It's kind of nice, but we don't belong there. Or it's like a guy showing up at a bachelorette party, or a woman showing up at a stag or a bachelor party. We just don't fit, right? We need to have a space where we fit. And there was nowhere for that COO. And so I wanted to have an organization that was exclusively for the COO, so that the organizations that were for entrepreneurs could be exclusively for entrepreneurs, because we're a different DNA. Most COOs have a very different personality profile to their entrepreneurial counterpart. So we use a couple of different personality profiles. One is the Kolbe profile. The Kolbe profile talks about how you start and initiate projects. Most second in commands initiate or start projects by asking a lot of questions, or by putting a system or a playbook in place before they start the project. Most entrepreneurs just start and they figure it out as they go, right? It's kind of like, I'm not a hairy version of a woman. I see and perceive the world differently from my wife, right? She's not a hairless version of me. We see things differently. We communicate differently. We collaborate differently. But if we can learn how to communicate, then we can become a really strong force. The COO needs the space where they don't get overpowered by the entrepreneurs, and where they get to work on certain issues for longer periods of time. Like, they would like to sit down and talk about interviewing for 2 days, but most entrepreneurs have moved on to a different idea or a different topic 30 minutes in.
Yeah, it's totally true. How is the COO Alliance done? I mean, in your book, I thought it was interesting that you shared your vivid vision, right? You actually sort of put it right in the middle of the book. How is it performing? Because I think the plan took you up to 2025 or 2026.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Doing great. We're actually now hosting one of our in-person events every year at MIT's Endicott House, which is where the EMP program hosts. We held our first one there last September. We're going back again this September. We hold another in-person event every year in Vancouver, Canada, or Scottsdale, Arizona. And then we have a 2-hour event online every month via Zoom. And we've got members from 17 countries now from around the world. I'd say about 80% of our members are US, 10% are Canada, and 40% of our members are actually women, which is a great kind of proof of point. I mean, Sheryl Sandberg was the COO for Facebook. She's kind of the queen bee of COOs. It just kind of makes sense. But yeah, it's doing quite well.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. I can see why it'd be really valuable. I mean, not just for entrepreneurs, but anybody who has some, it's important to have a community that you can learn and grow with, that is challenging you and investing in your development alongside.
Yeah, and we put a bar in place that to qualify for membership, you have to be the second in command, but your company needs to do at least 5 million or greater in revenue. So that we're trying to say that this is for, real businesses with real operational issues, with real teams. Not that a $2 million business isn't a real business, but it's just smaller yet. You probably don't have a true COO. You probably have a director of operations.
Yeah, makes total sense. Look, we're getting towards the end of the time today, but I want to talk a little bit about, we talked a bit about learning and development. One of my personal values is excellence. I define that as being obsessed with learning. I'm just curious, what are you trying to learn this year and how are you evolving?
I'm trying to learn all the areas of my life that have nothing to do with business. So my wife and I are attending 3 biohacking conferences this year. We're going to Tim Gray's biohacking event in England. We're going to Dave Asprey's one in Dallas. We're going to one this week in Ibiza. Spending a lot more time looking at the rest of myself as a human who shows up around, relationships, relationship with myself, polarity, sexuality, health, sleep, really kind of plugging into those areas and not spending so much time thinking about business. I used to be that business event junkie, which is good, but I don't know, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, right? So I want, that's one thing I'm doing. And then the other one is just, we've become nomads. We sold everything 3 years ago. So we're traveling the world constantly. We've been in 45 countries in the last 3 years, and we're trying to find one of our forever homes. We think it might be Northern Italy. So we're heading into Northern Italy this summer for about a month just to start poking around Lake Garda and Verona and seeing if we can find where we might want to have one of our places. The other one will probably be Dubai, and the third will probably be Bali.
Amazing. Yeah, I've gotten a chance to spend time in all 3 of those countries, but Italy is just one of the most special places on the planet. So
good.
Well, we'll leave it there. Well, we've been talking to Cameron Herold, the author of Second in Command and the founder of the COO Alliance. Cameron, where can people go to learn more about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, just go to CameronHerold.com, and it's HEROLD.com. All of my books, including The Second in Command, are on Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. And then check out the Second in Command podcast as well.
Awesome. And we'll get those resources into the show notes, but thanks again for being on the call today.
Appreciate it. Thanks, David.
Thank you for listening to the Future is Borderless podcast with David Nilsson. Be sure to click subscribe to future episodes so you can hear from more top entrepreneurs and thought leaders. And we'll see you again next time.